let's focus on a VMware instance of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. The way we'll achieve it is by setting up the VMware environment and then installing Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Let's log in as a user who has access to the VMware instances, user root, and once we have our desktop, we'll launch the icon which leads us to VMware. As you can see, we've got the Red Hat Enterprise Linux DVD inserted into the drive. This DVD has all of the software you'll find on CDs 1 through 5. Here's the VMware Server Console icon. We've created this many versions of Linux CBT ago, and this particular system happens to be that machine, that SUSE Enterprise machine we mentioned, which functions as a VMware server. VMware is a hot topic because it allows administrators and data center maintainers to make full or take full advantage of unused CPU and other hardware resources. Let's launch VMware Server Console. Now we need to allocate space and resources for this new instance. We've connected to the local host and we've closed the window where we have our other instances, but if we click on inventory, we'll see the list of other VMware hosts. We've got XP, FreeBSD, Solaris, and Debian. But we don't need the inventory window at this stage. We do need to create a new virtual machine. Now on this system we have a hard drive dedicated to housing virtual servers. A df-h will show that we have a mount point named VMware 1 located off of the root of the file system, and it is a hard drive that's about 500 gigabytes with about 101 gigabytes free. So we can allocate, let's say, 25 gigabytes for Red Hat Enterprise out of this space. Beneath VMware 1, we'll find multiple subdirectories, including Linux CBT, which is used to store other information, but more importantly, the virtual machines subdirectory, which contains one directory per item in our inventory. For example, for Debian 4X, you'll see all of the files that represent the file system, configuration options, and so on. So when we set up an environment for this Red Hat Enterprise VMware installation, a similar subdirectory structure will be created with files that have a prefix of the name of the inventory item, and these files are used for different reasons, for file systems, options, and so on. All managed by VMware, of course. Now, this is a pretty powerful system. It has multiple CPUs. A cat proc CPU info will reveal those multiple CPUs, 2.6 gigahertz CPUs, that are largely unused. And uptime will give us a sense as for the utilization for 1, 5, and 15 minutes, and it's usually low. Top will tell us what the current utilization is like, and again, it's pretty low. With that said, let's clear screen, return to the VMware Server Console, and create our environment. We'll create a new virtual environment, new virtual machine environment that is, and we want to designate one of our distinct NICs. By the way, if we just go to View Inventory and look at the Debian setup, for example, this Debian setup has all of the options that we need for our new Red Hat setup, such as the Ethernet, mouse, processors, so on and so forth. So we can dedicate 2 processors. It will automatically detect the mouse, and we'll use dev vmnet 2 as the network interface. This is a dedicated interface for our Linux instances. The Debian instance, as you can see, has pre-allocated space of 50 plus 10 plus 10 plus 10, so 80 gigabytes of storage. It also has access to the CD-ROM drive, which doubles as a DVD-ROM drive. And we've allocated 512 megs of memory. This system, if we execute free-m, which is another Linux utility, has about 2.5 gigabytes worth of memory. So we can allocate as much as we'd like up to that point, or up to and close to that point, that is, leaving some for the host operating system. Again, VMware is separate from Xen or other virtualization technologies. This is a third-party product, which is all the rave. So we don't want to power on the Debian 4X instance. We'll close it. We don't want to actually see the inventory window. We want to be able to create a new instance for usage across the board. Navigate to Quick Switch, it turns off the interface so that we see less of the interface. Double click up top, it turns it off. Basically makes it available on a pop-out basis. Now we want to create a new host, so we'll go to File, New, Virtual Machine, and then a wizard pops up. This wizard allows us to specify the applicable properties of the system. This is a typical system. It isn't custom, so we'll go ahead and select typical. It's a Linux system. However, VMware supports multiple other OSs. When you select Linux, it defaults to Red Hat Linux. You can also indicate a version of Enterprise Linux. We'll select 4 as it's the closest. This version also supports 64-bit OSs. However, in order for 64-bit OSs to be supported, your host operating system should be 64-bit as well, so you should match them up. Otherwise, even if you're able to get it to work, you'll only obtain a high level of emulation, which could hinder performance. So if you want to support 64-bit base VMware hosts, then ensure that the host system is running a 64-bit version of Linux or whatever other operating system you are using to host. So we'll go ahead and indicate Red Hat Enterprise Linux 4 version 5 hasn't been included into this version of VMware Server. But for our intents and purposes, Enterprise Linux 4 will work. We'll change it from Enterprise Linux 4 to 5. And by the way, this is only a suggested name. You can call it whatever you'd like, such as RH5 Instance 1. So long as you name it something consistent, the VMware wizard will create a subdirectory beneath VMware 1, virtual machines, followed by the name of the instance. Additionally, you can place your instance anywhere you'd like on your computer. So it doesn't have to be beneath that VMware 1 partition that we pointed out in the shell. But for our intents and purposes, it works because this is the mount point which leads to a hard drive that has ample storage. However, if we have storage elsewhere in the system, such as on the root file system, and if we have enough available storage, we can use the optional mount point as well. So you can store it anywhere you'd like. We've just decided to store our operating system guests on distinct partitions, distinct mount points, or beneath a distinct mount point in distinct directories. Let's click on Next. Whether or not you want to use bridged networking, which makes use of your default network interface used by the host system, or use network address translation, use host-only networking, which means networking is only local within the host, or if you don't want networking to be enabled. Bridge networking is the option which allows you to select an interface and bridge connectivity. Disk size. How much space should be provisioned? Now, as you saw before, we utilized 2.5 gigabytes for our Red Hat Enterprise installation. So if we specify 8 gigabytes, this should be more than enough. By default, VMware splits the storage into 2 gigabyte sizes. If you create 100 gigabytes of storage, it'll create 52 gigabyte size files to increase performance. The disk space will be allocated now. And we'll click on Finish, and that's what will take a little time. 8 gigs doesn't take that much time, but a little time to allocate. And we'll have it available to us momentarily. So again, VMware provides virtualization. It creates a container within an operating system environment to house other guest operating systems of various types, as well as of various platform types, such as 64-bit versus 32-bit. If you have 64-bit, you can host 32-bit OSs. Usually you cannot the other way around, unless of course there are patches or modifications to the VMware software which permits it. In any case, you probably wouldn't want to, as it would hinder performance. So the 8 gigabytes of storage is being created. Now, from a file system perspective, if we navigate back to VMware 1, virtual machines, we'll see that a new directory has been created named after the instance that we defined. And there we see the various items. RH5 instance, VMDK, these are virtual disk drives that are being used by VMware. As mentioned, they're split across 2 gigabyte files, so each of these files will occupy 2 gigabytes of storage, and as we can see, the third one's being created. It's roughly over a gigabyte right now. LSLTRH will tell us that it's at 1.4. When it reaches 2 gigabytes, then the fourth and final file will be created, and we'll be nearing the end of the create disk process. So as you can see, we're at 80-something%, and that third file is already, that fourth file that is already at 603 megabytes. It moves very quickly. So these are the disk files that will constitute the hard drives or drive or the hard drive that is that's seen by the guest operating system. So when we install Red Hat Enterprise Linux, VMware will present this block of 2 gigabyte storage files as contiguous space. So the operating system will believe the 4 2 gigabyte files to be one 8 gigabyte hard drive. So now we've got our settings for this Red Hat Enterprise system. The Ethernet 1 is bridged. As we mentioned, we wanted this option to be tied to VMnet 2, that is. So we'll just go to Custom Specific Virtual Network, VMnet 2. We know this because when we set up the VMware software, we indicated that VMnet 2 would point to a specific Ethernet interface, as this system has multiple interfaces. So we want all of our bridged interfaces, or all of our interfaces, to route to specific virtual networks. Let's click on OK. We'll move this into focus, and we should be fine. And we'll scroll down towards the bottom, and now it's set to use dev VMnet 2. This is optional. If you select bridge or NAT, the primary interface will be used, but from the shell, if we specify ifconfig, you'll see the interfaces that are available. Ifconfig-A shows all of the interfaces that are available. VMnet 2 is tied to one of the interfaces that we'd like to use. So the memory will be 256 megs. This can be upped as well. The specifications for memory are indicated, including the maximum that you should specify, which is indicated by this blue mark. However, you can just type it in. Let's say we want to allocate 512 megs of memory, then 512 megs of memory will be subtracted from the operating system's total amount of memory when we start the virtual host. However, this is the maximum. The blue triangle represents the maximum amount of memory that we should allocate. And if you drag the bar to that area, you'll see it's in the vicinity of 2 gigabytes, and the system has about 2.5 gigabytes. So in other words, it always encourages you to leave space for the host operating system. There are minimums, maximums, and recommended triangles. The green represents recommended. Just click on it, and it takes you there. Click on the yellow, and it takes you to the minimum, which they suggest is 32 megabytes. Recommended, however, is 256. But we want more. The more random access memory made available, the faster the virtual guest will perform. Whether or not you want the virtual guest to have a floppy drive is a separate issue. We'll remove it, as there is no floppy drive in the system. Let's click on OK to commit the changes, and now we have the profile. Now there are other things you can do with the virtual machine. If you edit it, you can click on Add to add to the pool of resources other devices such as sound, another Ethernet adapter, USB serial, the different types of ports that you're accustomed to finding on a standard PC. VMware creates a software-based PC. There are options over to the right, such as the name, which can be changed, and the type of OS, and the directory. So even after you've installed the operating system, you can redirect the OS to somewhere else on your system, either manually via the shell, and then update your VMware configuration by redirecting the working directory, or via the working directory icon or option using the browse icon within the VMware setting. Power controls, green is power on, red is power off for this particular host. Whether or not you want to take snapshots, the permissions of the virtual machine, the startup and shutdown, whether or not the virtual machine should be started whenever the system starts. We can go ahead and set that now, power it on. So let's say we reboot the host system. So long as